Welcome to Aman Jaiswal's YouTube channel. Today I'll be talking about composition in photography. To talk about composition, let's understand what exactly a photograph is. Your photograph is basically a two-dimensional box which is actually representing a three-dimensional world and composing a photograph. It means placing the elements of your image in the way that the image tells a story to the viewers. Now the question is how to make a composition look nice in a photograph. The real challenge in photography is how you compose your photograph in a composition. A composition is the most important thing which will tell a story of the image to the viewer as a photographer. You should work hard to compose your image as a viewer would see it. Viewer should not have to work hard to see a beautiful photograph. When he sees a photograph, it should be good enough. The viewer should understand what the subject is and what the actual story is. So that is the reason why composition is so important in photography. Now I will tell you certain guidelines which you can use in composing a photograph. When you see the images, you will have a better understanding on how you can use these guidelines in your photography. The first guideline in composition is the rule of thirds. Now, if you have read somewhere about composition, you might have heard about the rule of thirds. Generally, as a beginner photographer, what we basically do is to try to shoot the subject and keep it at the center. Now the thing is, if you do that, it might result into a boring image. So the rule of thirds says, if you divide an image into three equal parts, horizontally or vertically, you will see that these lines intersect each other at 4 points. You should place your subject at any 4 intersection points. Now when you place your subject that you want to draw the viewer's attention to on any of the 4 intersection points, the viewer's eyes gets drawn to these points and it is very easy to bring their focus and grab attention towards the main subject of the image that you have positioned on the intersection points. The rule of thirds is a very easy guideline that will help you take an interesting image and you will realize that you are creating much more dynamic and better looking images. The next guideline is centered composition. In the beginning I told you if you place the subject in the center of the frame, it might look very boring, but photography is an art form and sometimes placing your image in dead center can also make the image look interesting. However, this has to be done by looking at the visual and keeping some points in mind. So basically, when you use center composition, one thing that you have to understand is you have to balance the left and the right part or the top and the bottom part of the image. I have seen that this type of composition works very well when you have a certain kind of symmetry in your scene. Sometimes a reflection can be shown with a certain kind of symmetry. So centric composition can also create amazing images and they can look simple but at the same time very visually appealing. The next composition guideline is leading lines. As the name suggests, leading lines means that there will be lines which will lead and converge to a single point or to your subject. Leading lines is a very interesting and a powerful composition technique that you can use to spice up your images. The challenge will be when you are using leading lines is that when you are shooting, you won't get those lines very easily, and when you take a photograph, the lines will be straight and sometimes you will see that there will be curved lines also. It is your job as a photographer to visualize your scene and try to have a very interesting end point to your image. That is why leading lines are very important to compose your images. You can place the most important subject of your image in the point where all the lines are converging. It can be a very interesting composition technique to create very beautiful images. So make sure when you are shooting next time, try to visualize certain lines which can help you create dynamic images in the next composition. The Another thing that impacts the composition in the photograph is the focal length. The focal length of the lens you are shooting with makes a lot of difference to the composition. Even if you are photographing the same scene, the end result will vary depending on the parameters of the lens that you are shooting with. If you are shooting with a wide angle lens, you will get a wider perspective. This will give you a very different image. Whereas if you are shooting with a 50mm lens or a 200mm lens, each will give you a different perspective. In short, the focal length mechanism is different for each lens and it will give you a different look and feel to your image. When you look through the viewfinder and you will zoom in and out, with the lens, the background will start compressing or expanding. Therefore, you have to know what shot exactly you want. So according to that, you have to use the right lens. The next thing that affects the composition of the photograph is the aperture. Many of you will wonder, what does aperture have to do with the composition of the photograph? I can assure you, it has a very important role. This is because the aperture helps in increasing and decreasing the foreground and the background of your photograph. If you focus on your subject and use a wide aperture, the background will be out of focus and you might get a bokeh shot. You will do this when you don't have an interesting background or you want to highlight the subject from the background. However, if you want to include the background or elements of the background to enhance the interest in your subject or to bring him in reference to a context, then you would use a smaller aperture, say f8 and beyond, depending on how much of the background you want to bring in the photograph. Now, if you don't know exactly how aperture works, I have a separate video about it. I will link it in the card above and also put it in the description below. So the thing that we spoke about in a great composition are: first is rule of thirds, second is centered composition, third is leading lines, fourth is the use of appropriate lenses, and the last one is the right aperture. If you like my video, please like, share and subscribe. And do not forget to press the bell icon so that when I upload my next video, you can get notified. And please do not forget to comment.